Caught my fiancée texting her ex about getting rid of me after the wedding. So I got rid of her first. 3 weeks before what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, I discovered something that shattered everything I believed about love, trust, and the person I was planning to spend forever with. What started as a simple moment of borrowing a phone charger turned into the most devastating revelation that would change the course of my entire future. My fiancé and I had been together for 4 years. We met during a community volunteer event at a local animal shelter, and from the moment we started talking about our shared love for rescued dogs, I knew she was special. She had this infectious laugh that made everyone around her smile, and the way she cared for those abandoned animals showed me a side of compassion I'd never experienced before. Our relationship felt like something out of a romantic movie. We shared the same values, dreams of traveling the world together, and even talked about adopting children someday instead of having biological ones because we both felt strongly about giving homes to kids who needed them. The proposal happened 18 months ago during a hiking trip to our favorite mountain trail. I'd been carrying the ring in my backpack for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment. When we reached the summit and she turned to look at the valley below with tears in her eyes from the sheer beauty of it all, I knew it was time. She said yes before I even finished asking the question, and we spent the rest of the afternoon planning our future under that endless sky. Wedding planning became our obsession. We spent countless evenings scrolling through Pinterest boards, tasting cake samples, and arguing playfully about flower arrangements. She wanted peonies, I preferred roses, so we compromised on a mix of both. Our guest list grew from 50 people to nearly 200 as we realized how many lives we'd touched together. The venue we chose was a restored barn about an hour outside the city, complete with string lights and a view of rolling hills that reminded us of that hiking trail where everything began. Money was tight, but we made it work. I picked up extra shifts at my job while she sold some of her grandmother's jewelry to help cover the catering costs. We handmade our wedding invitations during weekend craft sessions that usually ended with us covered in glue and laughing at our artistic disasters. Her sister helped with the dress alterations, and my brother agreed to officiate the ceremony after getting ordained online. Everything felt perfect, like all the pieces of our life puzzle were finally falling into place. The stress of wedding planning did create some tension between us, but I thought that was normal. She became more secretive with her phone, always placing it face down when we were together and taking calls in the other room. When I asked about it, she explained that she was coordinating surprise elements for the wedding and didn't want to spoil anything. It made sense to me at the time, and I actually found it endearing that she was putting so much effort into making our day special. 3 weeks before the wedding, while she was in the shower, her phone kept buzzing on the nightstand. The screen lit up repeatedly with text notifications, and normally I wouldn't have looked, but the constant noise was distracting me from the book I was reading. I glanced over, not intending to read anything, but saw a name that made my stomach drop. It was her ex-boyfriend from college, someone she told me she had no contact with anymore. My hands were shaking as I picked up the phone. The preview showed just enough text to make my heart race. Something about after the wedding and she won't suspect. Every rational part of my brain told me not to look further, that there had to be an innocent explanation, but my gut knew something was terribly wrong. I'd never violated her privacy before, but something about this situation felt like a matter of survival. What I found in those messages destroyed everything I thought I knew about the woman I was about to marry. Months of conversations stretched back through her chat history with him, filled with discussions about their plan for after the wedding. They'd been meeting secretly, not just texting, and the details made me physically sick. She'd been complaining about me to him, calling me naive and easy to manipulate. The worst part was reading how she described me as a safety net, while she figured out how to get back together with him without losing the financial security I provided. The messages revealed that she'd never gotten over him, even during our 4 years together. He'd been in and out of relationships, never ready to settle down, but recently decided he wanted her back. The timing wasn't coincidental. He knew about our wedding and had been encouraging her to go through with it. Their plan was sickeningly calculated. She would marry me, establish legal rights to my assets and savings, then create problems in our marriage that would justify a divorce where she could claim half of everything I'd worked for. Reading those texts felt like having my chest ripped open. Messages about how boring I was, how she had to fake enthusiasm during intimate moments, how she counted down the days until she could be free of me but not before securing her financial future. They joked about my proposal, calling it desperate and pathetic. She'd even sent him photos of her engagement ring, not out of excitement, but to show him what she had to endure until their plan could unfold. The shower was still running, giving me time to read more. I discovered they'd been intimate multiple times over the past year, including the night after my birthday when she'd claimed to be visiting her sick aunt. Photos proved they'd been on weekend trips together while telling me she was attending work conferences. The depth of the deception was overwhelming, and I found myself screenshotting everything with trembling fingers, though I wasn't sure why. Maybe I needed proof that this nightmare was real. When she came out of the bathroom in her towel, chatting casually about dinner plans, I had to excuse myself to the kitchen where I promptly threw up. The cognitive dissonance of seeing her normal, loving expression while knowing what I just discovered made me feel like I was losing my mind. She asked if I was feeling okay, and when I said I might be coming down with something, she brought me tea and rubbed my back. The tenderness felt like torture knowing it was all performance. That night, lying next to her while she slept peacefully, I stared at the ceiling planning my next move. Part of me wanted to confront her immediately, to scream and demand explanations, but a cooler part of my brain knew that wouldn't accomplish anything except giving her a chance to spin more lies. Instead, I decided to do some investigating of my own. The next morning, after she left for work, I called in sick and spent the day going through our shared finances, legal documents, and anything else that might be relevant to protecting myself. What I found was even more disturbing than the text messages. She'd been slowly moving money from our joint wedding account into a personal savings account I didn't know existed. Small amounts that I wouldn't notice, but over months it added up to several $1,000s. I also discovered she'd been researching divorce laws in our state, specifically focusing on asset division and spousal support. Her browser history showed searches for how long you had to be married to claim certain benefits, and what constituted grounds for divorcing someone with assets. The calculation behind every aspect of our relationship became crystal clear, and I realized I'd been living in a complete fantasy. Date 1. After spending 2 days in a haze of disbelief and planning, I decided my first step needed to be protecting myself legally and financially. I took screenshots of everything I'd found, including the text messages, browser history, and evidence of the moved money. Then I did something I never thought I'd have to do. I hired a private investigator to document her affair and gather more evidence of her deception. The investigator worked quickly, and within a week, I had photos of her and her ex together at restaurants, hotels, and even shopping for what looked like vacation clothes. The timestamps showed these meetings had been happening regularly for months, always when she told me she was somewhere else. One particularly painful photo showed them looking at jewelry together, and I realized she'd probably been planning to leave me for him long before the wedding was even scheduled. Meanwhile, I had to pretend everything was normal. Wedding preparations continued, vendors needed final confirmations, and family members kept calling with excitement about the upcoming celebration. The hardest part was maintaining the charade with her, smiling and nodding when she talked about our honeymoon plans or our future together. Every conversation felt like participating in my own emotional torture, but I needed time to set up my counterplan properly. I started by quietly securing my individual assets, making sure our joint accounts couldn't be emptied without my signature, and consulting with a lawyer about the evidence I'd gathered. The lawyer was impressed with how thorough my documentation was and assured me that what I'd found would protect me from any claims she might make during or after our breakup. More importantly, he helped me understand that her plan to use marriage as a way to access my assets constituted fraud, which could have serious legal consequences for her. During this time, I also reached out to some of our mutual friends and family members, but not to expose her directly. Instead, I started having casual conversations about relationships, trust, and what people would do if they discovered their partner was cheating. The responses were varied, but most people agreed that deception of this magnitude was unforgivable. These conversations helped me realize that when the truth came out, I'd have support from people who truly cared about me. The private investigator provided one final piece of evidence that sealed her fate. He'd managed to record a phone conversation between her and her ex where they discussed their timeline in detail. She was planning to stay married to me for exactly 2 years, long enough to claim significant assets in a divorce, but not so long that she'd waste too much of her life pretending to love me. They laughed about how easy I was to fool and how I'd probably be devastated but would eventually get over it. Hearing her voice saying those things about me, about us, was worse than reading the text messages. The coldness in her tone when she described manipulating my emotions made me realize I'd never really known her at all. The woman I'd fallen in love with, proposed to, and planned a future with was a complete fabrication. Everything from her interest in animal rescue to her dreams of adopting children had been calculated moves to make herself seem more appealing to me. 2 weeks before the wedding, I finally felt ready to act. But instead of confronting her directly, I decided to let her experience the same kind of shock and betrayal she'd been planning for me. I wanted her to understand what it felt like to have your world turned upside down without warning, to feel the ground disappear beneath your feet just when you thought everything was secure. Update 2. My plan began with a seemingly innocent suggestion that we have a joint meeting with both sets of parents to finalize wedding day logistics. She was hesitant at first, saying it wasn't necessary, but I insisted it would make everyone feel more included in our special day. The meeting was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon at my parents' house, with her parents driving in from 2 hours away specifically for this gathering. What she didn't know was that I'd already spoken to all 4 parents separately, showing them the evidence I'd gathered and explaining the situation. The initial reactions were exactly what you'd expect: disbelief, anger, disappointment, and concern for my well-being. Her own parents were particularly devastated, saying they'd never seen behavior like this from their daughter and couldn't understand where they'd gone wrong in raising her. My parents wanted to confront her immediately, but I convinced them that a public revelation would be more effective. I wanted her to experience the shame and embarrassment of having her deception exposed in front of the people whose opinions mattered most to her. It seemed like appropriate consequences for someone who'd been planning to humiliate me through a fraudulent marriage and calculated divorce. The day of the family meeting, she seemed nervous but attributed it to normal pre-wedding jitters. She'd spent extra time getting ready, choosing an outfit that made her look innocent and wholesome, probably unconsciously trying to reinforce the image she'd been projecting throughout our relationship. When we arrived at my parents' house and saw both sets of parents waiting in the living room with serious expressions, her nervousness visibly increased. I started the meeting by thanking everyone for coming and talking about how important family support was for a successful marriage. Then I mentioned that before we could move forward with the wedding, there was something important that needed to be addressed. The room fell completely silent, and I could see her face starting to change as she realized this wasn't going to be a typical wedding planning discussion. Instead of dramatic accusations or emotional outbursts, I simply connected my laptop to the television and began showing the evidence I'd gathered. The text messages appeared on the screen, enlarged so everyone could read them clearly. Her face went through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, panic, and finally resignation, as she realized there was no way to explain away what everyone was seeing. The room remained silent as we scrolled through months of messages detailing her affair and the plan to defraud me through marriage. Her parents kept looking between the screen and their daughter, trying to reconcile the evidence with the person they thought they knew. My parents watched her carefully, probably looking for signs of remorse or attempts to explain herself, but she just sat frozen in her chair. When we reached the recorded phone conversation, her mother started crying. Hearing her daughter's voice discussing the manipulation so casually, laughing about my naivety, and planning to destroy my life for financial gain was too much for anyone who cared about basic human decency. Her father looked like he wanted to disappear entirely, and I actually felt sorry for both of them in that moment. After all the evidence was presented, I finally spoke directly to her for the first time since discovering her betrayal. I told her that the wedding was obviously canceled, that I'd already contacted our vendors to minimize financial losses, and that she needed to remove her belongings from our shared apartment within the week. My voice was calmer than I expected it to be, probably because I'd had time to process my emotions privately rather than reacting in the heat of the moment. Her first response wasn't an apology or an explanation. It was anger. She accused me of violating her privacy, claiming that reading her messages was a betrayal of trust. The irony of someone who'd been planning to defraud me through marriage complaining about trust violations was almost laughable, and I could see the same thought occurring to everyone else in the room. When that approach failed to generate sympathy, she tried tears, then bargaining, then making excuses about being confused and not knowing what she really wanted. None of it worked because the evidence was too comprehensive and damning. There was no way to claim the messages were taken out of context or that the affair was a momentary lapse in judgment. Months of calculated deception couldn't be explained away with temporary confusion or emotional vulnerability. Everyone in that room could see exactly who she really was, and there was no going back to the illusion she'd maintained for so long. Her parents left first, taking her with them after a brief, whispered conversation. Before walking out, her mother apologized to me and my parents, saying she was ashamed and didn't know how to make things right. Her father shook my hand and told me I was better off discovering the truth before the wedding rather than after. Their obvious shame and disappointment somehow made the whole situation even more surreal. Final update. The aftermath of that family meeting was both exactly what I expected and completely surprising in different ways. Within hours, word had spread through our social circle about why the wedding was canceled. I hadn't intended for the information to become public so quickly, but apparently her parents had called other family members to explain their sudden departure, and the story spread from there. The response from our friends was overwhelmingly supportive toward me, but it also revealed some uncomfortable truths about how well people really knew either of us. Several friends admitted they'd noticed changes in her behavior over the past year, but hadn't felt comfortable saying anything. Others mentioned feeling like something was off about our relationship recently, but couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. It made me realize that while I'd been completely fooled, other people had picked up on subtleties that I'd missed or ignored. Her ex-boyfriend tried to contact me through social media, apparently wanting to explain his side of the situation. I blocked him immediately without reading his messages because there was literally nothing he could say that would be relevant or helpful. His willingness to participate in such an elaborate deception told me everything I needed to know about his character, and I had no interest in giving him an opportunity to justify or minimize his actions. The financial aspect of untangling our shared life was more complicated than I'd anticipated. Even though I'd protected myself legally, we still had joint accounts, shared credit cards, and various financial commitments related to the canceled wedding. She initially tried to claim half of the wedding deposits we'd lost, arguing that she'd contributed to them, but the evidence of her stealing money from our wedding account eliminated any legal standing she might have had. More surprisingly, several vendors refused to charge us cancellation fees after learning why the wedding was called off. The florist, photographer, and even the caterer said they'd rather absorb the costs than profit from such a traumatic situation. Their kindness during such a difficult time restored some of my faith in human decency and reminded me that not everyone operates with hidden agendas and selfish motives. The hardest part wasn't the anger or betrayal. It was grieving the loss of the future I'd imagined. For years of shared memories, plans, and dreams don't disappear overnight just because you discover they were built on lies. I found myself mourning not just the relationship, but the version of myself who had trusted so completely and loved so openly. It felt like a fundamental part of my personality had been damaged, and I wasn't sure if I'd ever be able to trust someone that deeply again. However, as weeks passed, something unexpected began happening. The friends and family members who rallied around me during this crisis showed me what real love and support looked like. Unlike her calculated affection, their care came without conditions or hidden motives. My parents invited me to stay with them while I figured out my next steps. My siblings called regularly just to check on my emotional state, and friends organized low-key activities to keep me distracted from dwelling on negative thoughts. I also started receiving messages from people I barely knew, friends of friends, distant relatives, even some of the vendors we'd worked with, sharing their own stories of betrayal and recovery. It turned out that discovering a partner's deception wasn't as uncommon as I'd thought, and many people had not only survived similar experiences but emerged stronger and more self-aware. Their stories gave me hope that this devastating experience might eventually become a source of wisdom rather than just pain. 6 months after what should have been my wedding day, I can honestly say I'm grateful for discovering the truth when I did. The alternative, years of marriage to someone who viewed me as a financial opportunity rather than a life partner, would have been infinitely worse. The divorce she was planning would have been expensive, emotionally devastating, and might have left me too damaged to ever trust again. Instead, I'm learning to rebuild my life with a clearer understanding of what I actually want in a partner and relationship. The experience taught me to trust my instincts when something feels wrong, to value consistency between someone's words and actions, and to recognize that real love enhances your life rather than requiring you to diminish yourself to maintain it. She never apologized, never attempted to make amends, and as far as I know, she and her ex-boyfriend are together now. Part of me wonders if their relationship will work out, given that it was built on deception and betrayal, but mostly I don't think about them at all anymore. They're both people who are capable of elaborate emotional fraud, and they deserve each other in the worst possible way. The most important realization from this whole experience is that I didn't lose anything valuable when I lost her. What I lost was an illusion, a fantasy relationship that never actually existed. The real her, the person who could plan such calculated cruelty, was never someone I would have chosen to love if I'd known who she really was. Discovering her true nature wasn't a loss. It was a rescue from a future that would have destroyed me slowly instead of all at once. Today, I'm focused on rebuilding my life with better boundaries, clearer standards, and deeper appreciation for the people who showed up for me when everything fell apart. The wedding may have been canceled, but I got something more valuable than a marriage. I got my freedom from someone who would have made my life miserable while pretending to love me. And that's worth celebrating, even if it took me a while to see it that way.